Hello, fellow reader. Join me, I am your host, Sansi. Dive into the world of magic and explore the most stories full of wonder, fantastical delights. Open your eyes and see the parade come to life. Sansi's parade, Sansi's parade. Join the parade, Sansi's parade, parade. Sansi's parade, Sansi's parade. Join the parade, Sansi's parade.
Chapter 3. I'm hungry. Or maybe he's hungry. I don't know. I just feel hungry. That's not the point. It just makes writing hard, thinking hard. I'm having trouble staying in my head. Not sure that makes sense. I'll be honest, that last bit about my ma and grandpa in my room, that was like I was telling someone else's story for a moment. Was that my story? Remember, the five senses. The smell of the apartment, old and moldy, but also of meat and potatoes and cabbage rolls. The water-stained ceiling above the bed. The sounds outside in the street, cars, people yelling, even at 2 in the morning. The itchy blanket. I remember it. I met you the next morning. I guess you could say I was a person used to meeting people, especially as a delivery guy. New people didn't bother me much. I liked looking at them. That sounds strange. What I mean to say is, you meet a new person and you see things about that person. How maybe this guy's shoes were just shined, that guy's got a sweat stain ring around his collar. This lady's hair curlers are singed with black, that lady's lipstick goes around the outside of her lips. Everyone is unique. I actually first saw Dot from afar. I didn't know who it was then. I just knew the distant human was a short, stocky kind of girl with broad shoulders and a purposeful walk. She was probably around my age, with sweaty dirty blonde hair that was already falling out of its curls first thing in the morning. Her large cat's eye glasses seemed a bit too big for her face. After realizing she was also going into the main entrance at Joey Drew Studios, I dogged a bit to catch up and she held the door for me. She gave me the once-over, head to toe. It was quick, but she had made an opinion of me by the time it was over. I know this because we talked about it later. I thought you were tall, she'd said. Well, I am tall, I'd replied. You were like a baby horse, all limbs. You seemed off balance. I liked that. I still don't quite get why she liked that. But I do know that Dot was always suspicious of swagger. How can you tell if the person is being real or fake when they act all confident like that? After sizing me up, she'd continued her determined walk and gave the woman behind the desk a sharp nod before turning down the hall and disappearing around the corner. I, on the other hand, went up to the woman, who once again gave me that look of suspicion. Or maybe not. Maybe that's just how her face was. You know, I never asked her. I don't know the answer to that one. I never asked people a lot of stuff. Hey, I'm Daniel Lewick. Buddy, I said. She kept staring at me. I'm the new gopher and art apprentice. She stared. Someone tapped me on my arm. I turned and was face to face with a woman, probably around 50, with a puffy curl of soft brown bangs and hair framing her angular face. She had a deep wrinkle line between her eyebrows that made it look like she was concerned about something. But I would eventually discover that was just how she always looked. You're Daniel? She asked. I am. She wiped her hand on the apron she was wearing, and stuck it out to shake. I noticed it was stained with ink. Like my fingertips. I'm Ms. Lambert. I'm head of the art department. Come with me. I took her hand, we shook, and then I was following her back along the hall that yesterday had been so dark and creepy, but was now brightly lit with buzzing lights above. She pulled back the grate to the elevator and we stepped inside. Closing it behind us, she pushed a button and we were whisked up, all without saying anything. Which I didn't mind. I wasn't too much of a talker. Never was. Never will be. Definitely never will be. That's sort of funny. Gallows humor is what Dot calls that. Anyway. I was also really interested that a woman was in charge of the art department and was thinking about it a bit. I don't think I'd ever seen a woman in charge of anything before. Not that there hadn't been a lot of women working the last couple years. I did know about that, with the lack of men and them being all away at war and everything. But actually the boss? No, I hadn't seen that. I wondered why. The elevator jerked to a stop and my teeth knocked together a bit at the suddenness. Ms. Lambert noticed and laughed. Yeah, it does that. She pulled back the grate, it clanged open, and we stepped out onto the art department level. There were artists sitting around the room in their own little nooks and crannies, each bent over a desk and working hard. Each space was decorated with drawings and photographs. There was an organized chaos to it that I liked. It was also very quiet. I'd done enough deliveries to offices to know about the hum of conversation and the clicking of typewriters. It was like the sound of the city that way, a background white noise, almost comforting. But here the only sound I could really focus on was the scratching of pen on paper. It made me feel like any sound I made would be distracting. Like even my breath was a bit too loud. Like maybe I shouldn't be breathing. Ms. Lambert didn't feel the same way. Hey, can I get everyone's attention? She called out loudly. Heads popped up, eyes blinked in our direction. One guy sitting by the windows took off his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on again. This is Daniel Lewick, she said. Buddy, I corrected her. She looked at me. People call me Buddy. Okay. This is Buddy, he's our new gopher. Didn't Joey put a freeze on new hires? Asked the guy at the windows. Ms. Lambert shrugged. He's the one who hired Buddy. The man shook his head and turned back to his desk. I guess you can take that desk back there. Sorry it's a bit dark but, well, it's all we have, she said, pointing toward a dark corner of the room away from the natural light. What do I do? I asked her. She shrugged again. I guess just wait until someone needs you to deliver something or grab something. She looked at me looking at her, and her expression softened just a bit. Not a lot, not enough to erase the crease between her eyebrows, but a little bit. It's okay, buddy, we'll figure it all out. But I have to get back to work now. And with that, I made my way across the room. I took stock of the place as I did. It wasn't too big but there were, now that I could properly look, only 4 other people in it. The walls were unpainted. Slabs of wood, but they were covered almost entirely by drawings and photographs of people and animals and places, I guess to reference for poses and things when making the cartoons. I sat down at my desk. Yes, my corner was dark, but it didn't seem sad. It almost seemed cozy. Above it were yellowing drawings of Bendy. There were other characters too. A girl in a short black strapless dress with a halo. And something that looked like a tall wolf, ears sticking straight up into the air and wearing overalls. That's Alice Angel, that's Boris the wolf, and obviously that's Bendy, said a warm voice behind me. I turned to see one of the art guys looking down at me. And I'm Jacob. Nice to meet you, Mac. I took his hand and shook. He was dressed in a sharp grey suit and wore a maroon tie with matching pocket square. Snazzy dresser. Thanks. I guess I should learn this stuff, I said. Jacob laughed. Yes. But don't ask anyone. Especially Mr. Drew. You have any questions, stick with the art department. Some of the old-timers get sensitive. They don't understand how we didn't know who these characters were before we came here. Right, I said. Fame is fleeting, said Jacob, pushing his hat back a bit. He grinned at me. Then said, can you take this folder to Story? Need them to agree to the art before I get going. Oh, sure, I said. I took it from him and he made his way back to his desk. I turned back to look at mine, thinking about what he'd said. The wood was worn from years of use, darkened in some areas stained from ink spills. I could also see someone had carved into the soft wood itself. A couple of funny-looking eyes. Alice's halo. And just down toward the edge of the desk, a name. But it didn't look the same as the others. This looked like it had been carved over and over several times. Deeper. Clearly it was the desk's former owner. I'll try to do you proud, Henry, I said quietly to the desk. Then I glanced up to make sure no one heard. I got up and headed over to Ms. Lambert. She didn't have a secretary, and I wasn't sure who else to go to. She looked up at me with deep suspicion. I need to take this to Story, I said. She stared at me hard, giving me the impression she had no idea why I was telling her that. Where is it? I asked. Oh, she said. 1 floor down. Then she turned back to her storyboard and I felt pretty much invisible again. Okay, just do this, I told myself. Just impress folks and do your job, and eventually they'll let you draw. And at least you're not outside in the heat. Though truthfully inside wasn't that much cooler. The fans in the ceiling just seemed to push the hot around. I went down a floor and found myself in a room pretty much the same as the art department. More heads bent over desks. This time there was a young, pretty secretary by the entrance, and she looked up at me expectantly. "Hey, I'm Buddy, I'm new here. Was told to deliver this folder?" I phrased it like a question even though I knew that was what I had to do. I felt like an idiot. The secretary said, "Take it over to Dot." I looked around the room. "Who's Dot?" I asked. Now she looked at me like I was the idiot. The only female writer in the room? She also phrased that like a question, but it definitely was not meant as one. And it definitely made me feel stupid. I nodded quickly and looked around for a woman. Finally I saw her, sitting a little away from the rest of the team, next to a window with a low bookshelf underneath it. Her head was bent over so close to the paper I had fun imagining she was writing with her nose. "Excuse me," I said. She looked up at me sharply but not in surprise. She didn't seem scared. Just intense. Of course. I remembered now. The girl from downstairs. The one who'd held the door for me. I think she had a similar moment of realization. "Yes?" she said. "I was supposed to deliver this to you." I handed her the file, which she took with one quick, efficient movement. She looked at me again. "I'm new," I decided to explain. "Mr. Drew hired me yesterday. I'm in the art department." Why was I still talking? I didn't normally talk that much, so why was I now going on like this? "Okay," she said. Then she turned back to her writing and I had no choice but to leave. It's weird to think now that those 2 brief meetings made you sure of me. Made you like me. I'll never understand why. But I'll always be grateful you made the decision. I was lucky to have known you. The rest of the morning was pretty much a combo of me sitting at my desk for too long and then running deliveries. No one really knew I existed yet, and Ms. Lambert assured me that when the rest of the studio found out there was a new gopher in town, I'd be in high demand. "Enjoy the peace and quiet while you can," she said with a wry laugh. "And take this to music." So I did. I made my way down several stories until I ended up on the music level. This was the first time I really got a sense of what a maze this building was. Unlike in my department, which was just one big room, the elevator now opened up onto a narrow hall. It stretched out in both directions and there were no signs or other markers indicating which way I should go. Also no people, which was jarring compared with all the other bustling areas of the studio. Almost strangely creepy. My imagination immediately wondered what had happened to all the people. I pictured a giant hand coming out of the floor and scooping up all the people. It was funny, but somehow I felt a little uneasy still. I put that behind me. Because I was being silly. It was just an empty hallway. I chose to go right. I wandered along listening to the sound of my own footsteps until the hall opened onto a little space with 4 rooms off it. 3 of the doors were locked, the 4th opened onto an old bathroom that didn't look like it had been used in a while. I closed the door. The uneasy feeling was still there. Locked doors meant someone wanted to keep people out. But an unused bathroom meant that people hadn't been there for a while. Which was it? There was another small dark hallway splitting off from this one, but it felt like I was going the wrong way deeper into the maze, so I turned and headed back the other way. I only had the 2 choices after all. I passed the elevator and this time turned left. I felt more confident. This hallway had posters hanging on the walls, and as I walked along, framed sheets of music appeared and even a few framed records hanging as art. And then, suddenly, I was in a plain-looking hallway again. I spun around on my heel, but I couldn't figure out how it had happened. I must have missed a turn somewhere. I was starting to feel a little panicked. It was silly. These hallways couldn't go on forever. This building was wedged between 2 other buildings. This was New York, a city on an island, always going upward because there was no sideways to go. Just turn around and you'll figure it out. Eventually. But I couldn't. In fact, I couldn't find my way back to the elevator now either. I was starting to feel that familiar feeling I had delivering for Mr. Schwartz. I didn't want to be known as the late guy, or unreliable. Not here, not at the studio. Definitely not on my first day. I found myself in a hallway that was darker than the others. I was now genuinely getting scared. I was lost in a maze, and at this point my imagination was starting to get the better of me. Each time I turned a corner, my stomach clenched just a bit at the thought of what I might find. Or who. I turned another corner, and then I heard something. I strained harder to listen. Music. I could hear music. It was faint and thin. Like a slow, high-pitched scream. It grew louder, then faded away. And again, loud and fading. I followed the sound and turned a corner. The lights were brighter here, and I came upon a large empty desk next to a door. Above it was a sign, Music Department. And the music came from behind the door. Someone was playing. That someone was going to help me get out of this maze. I carefully opened the door and peeked inside. It was a large room, with a ceiling 2 stories high and a stage at one end. On the back wall, a square of bright white light flickered as if a reel of film had just finished playing. I turned to look up at the wall opposite. There was a projector booth up above, but the light was so blinding I couldn't make out if that guy Norman I'd met yesterday was there, or really if anyone was. So I turned back and walked farther into the room. Chairs and music stands were scattered across the stage. And instruments had been left on seats, open cases on the floor next to them. Looked like everyone had taken a lunch break. Except for the lady on the violin. She sat in the middle of the stage, surrounded by this forest of music stands, her hair long and straight and unstyled. Her sheet music hid her face and most of the instrument, so I could only see her hand and fingers, claw-like, holding down the strings on the violin's neck. The music she produced was slow and strained, hardly any kind of melody at all. It shot through my head and made me feel a little dizzy. "Excuse me?" I said quietly, not wanting to interrupt, but not knowing what else to do. She snapped her head up and the music stopped instantly. She stared at me from behind heavy-hooded eyes. "Hi, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I'm lost." There was a sudden loud crash from outside the room. Then an anguished scream. The woman stood up and stared at the door, and I turned to look, my heart pounding fast. "What is it?" The woman stared, completely still. Then in a whisper said, "He's coming." I turned back to her. "Who?" Suddenly the room got dark. I whipped around and saw the projector had gone out. Only a light in the corner lit the room now. I could feel my chest constrict with fear, but it was just a change in lighting. That was all. That was all. Thud. I turned slowly back toward the door. I remembered my nightmare then. The darkness around me. The hand through the door. I glanced at the violinist. She stood completely still in her long black dress. Her hair melted into it so she seemed like one long shadow. She wasn't turning away, she didn't run. She just stared at the door. Thud thud. Like the sound of someone limping, heavy on one foot. Just outside. Getting closer. No. I wasn't going to let my brain get the better of me. Thud thud. It wasn't a nightmare. I made my way slowly to the door, took in a deep breath, and then flung it open wide. No one was there. "He's coming." I looked at the violinist. She pointed toward the door with her bow. "Who?" I asked again. She said nothing, just kept staring. I was starting to feel more frustrated than scared, and I turned back around with a sharp sigh, only to confront the face of a creature covered in dripping black goo right in front of me. I stumbled backward, and the folder in my hand fell to the floor, forgotten, as the monster launched itself into the room using the doorframe to push its way toward me. Its whole body was covered in something dark and seeping. It groped at its own face and released a moan of pure anguish as it fell toward me. I hadn't been able to get away. I tripped on my own feet as it fell on top of me, covering my torso in the same sticky wet substance. I pushed hard as I could as it clawed at its face, that horrifying cry from deep within its throat never ending. Every time it opened its mouth the black ooze slipped down its throat, making it gurgle and sputter. Finally it rolled off me and I staggered back to standing. I looked down at myself. My hands, trousers, shirt, everything was covered. I looked closely at my hands, rubbing at the black goo. "Ink?" I said, gasping for breath. I turned to the thing on the ground and realized then that it wasn't some monster. It was a man. Covered in ink. A man covered in ink, writhing on the floor in agony and rage. I was down at his side at once. Sir, can you hear me?" The man suddenly grabbed at the collar of my shirt and pulled me in close. My eyes. I nodded and pried his clutching hand off me as I stood up. I frantically looked around the room and saw a cloth tucked into an open cello case. Behind that, by the back row, was half a glass of water. I rushed past the violinist still standing there like a statue, got both, and, in a panic, returned. Water, and a rag, I explained, handing them over to him. He waved his arms around blindly, and I grabbed his hand and wrapped his fingers around the glass. Did the same with the other one and the rag. I watched as he furiously wiped at his eyes, and it seemed to me he was making things worse. At the same time I wasn't about to tell him what to do, he seemed a bit crazed. Ink can do that to you. Eventually he was able to clean enough of his face off, because he calmed down and he dropped his arms to the side and lay there staring at the ceiling. "You okay, sir?" I asked. The man stared in silence for a moment longer and then turned his head so he could look at me. His face was smeared and the whites of his eyes weren't white. Instead, they were more like a pale shade of pink. Everything about him seemed pointy. His nose, his chin, even the shape of his eyebrows. That's when I noticed the red. The bit of blood dripping down his forehead. "Am I okay?" he asked with a laugh, repeating my question. He shook his head and then blinked at me hard. "You're bleeding," I said, and gestured toward the spot. The man touched it, then ran his fingers higher over his scalp. He flinched, and then made a sharp pulling gesture with his hand. He looked at his fingers. In them was a piece of glass. He looked back at me. "Who the heck are you?" "Oh, I'm Buddy. I'm the new gopher for the art department." He stared at me longer this time. Then he started to laugh, this laugh that was all breath and no sound. Almost like wheezing. "Art department. Okay, gopher for the art department. Answer me this. Why are you guys storing ink in my sheet music closet? And why is Joey running a pipe through my closet that's apparently filled with ink?" A pipe? With ink? That definitely didn't sound normal, but then again, I had no idea what was normal for an animation studio. "I don't know. You don't know. You don't know." The laughter got bigger even though it was still just breath. There was a clicking sound coming from the back of his throat now too. He pushed himself up so he was leaning back on his elbows, still laughing. "I don't know," I said, as if repeating it would make it sound like a less funny answer. "I don't even know where the sheet music closet is." I didn't know where most things were. Even now, at this moment, I don't always remember where things are. But I remember the man getting up and grabbing me by the elbow. And I remember looking at the violinist, the way she quietly stared while he pulled me out of the room. I remember following and not knowing what was going on. And his firm grip. His fingers were as pointy as the rest of him. I remember following a trail of inky footsteps along the floor in reverse. And I remember the closet. The door was wide open and the floor was pitch black and ink was dripping down over cliffs of white paper from high shelves like a waterfall had just been turned off. Broken glass was everywhere. "This is the sheet music closet," said the man, releasing my arm in a way that felt more like a push. I stumbled toward it. My toe kicked a shard and it clinked away into a dark corner. "And this is the ink that shouldn't be there." He pointed to a few remaining rows of unlabeled, still intact inkwells. "And this is the pipe that is inexplicably running with ink and has managed to burst, ruining untold amounts of my sheet music." "Okay," I said. I looked at him. He looked at me. "Okay?" He sounded indignant, but I didn't know what else I could say. All I wanted was to get back to the elevator and my work. When I didn't say anything, he shook his head at me. Then he leaned in so close I could see the ink that had seeped into each of his pores. When he spoke, I could see his ink-stained gums and tongue. "Clean up this mess." Then he stormed off and I was alone. Again. I stared into the closet. This feeling of being lost just wouldn't let me go. This feeling of always being wrong. It wasn't nice. And now, looking at the mess, I just didn't understand. Didn't they have people who cleaned up here? How was this my job? And how was I supposed to do this job? How do you clean up spilled ink? This is a tricky question to answer. Because the answer is, you don't. Let me tell you something about ink. It doesn't go away. I mean, you can wash your hands and scrub, and you think you've got it all, but then, a little spot, a small spot will pop up. Something you missed? Maybe. But it doesn't seem like it. So you wait for the layers of your skin to peel off instead. You wait for black stained skin to flake onto the floor. Then it's gone. Or is it? You think it's gone, but then you find more. Somewhere else. And more. And more. Ink never disappears. It's always there, like it was hiding, waiting to reveal itself. It's always there to remind you. It'll never go away. At first it's not so bad. You get used to seeing it on the inside of your index finger like that. Maybe it's even a friend. Or a mark of pride. That's how it lures you in. But it blossoms and burrows. And seeps and sinks. And drowns and drinks. It's alive. It's everywhere. It's inside me. It breathes for me. I can feel it sloshing about in my lungs. I can feel it in my brain. I am ink.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video / gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!